report because it's 5:30. So Jared has a agenda prepared for us. Do you want to lead us off, Jared, please?
Yes, ma'am. First item on there is the budget projection, which everybody should have in front of them, and it's also attached to the agenda, which is posted online. It's the exact same one that we saw back in March. I just wanted to reattach it for everybody. I have a separate kind of budget presentation to talk about tonight, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail. Just wanted to have the board kind of see it again, have it in front of you if you needed it. And again, it's attached to the agenda tonight. So the next piece of information you have is really kind of the budget presentation that I'm going to go into tonight for you, which, yes, a lot of the numbers do reference back to that budget projection. So feel free, if you do have specific questions on the projection compared to the presentation tonight, you can ask me questions on any of it. So, but again, both the projection and the presentation are attached to the agenda tonight. So I'm not going to go through, I know we have a lot to talk about in our hour tonight, so I'm not going to go through the budget presentation. Try not to go through it word for word. But what we typically do with this presentation is we start by talking about where we think we're going to end this year. For now, it's the 22 to 23 year, so that we can look forward to the 23-24 year. So starting with where I think we're going to end the 22-23, we start by looking at revenues on page 3 of the presentation there. We passed our budget last June, and there are extra copies up here if anybody wants. There's a couple extra if anybody wants them. I got you. When we passed our budget back at the beginning of June last year, we had budgeted revenues of almost $58 million. What my projection to end this year is just over $60 million, and there's a couple reasons why there's that $2 million variance. And I've listed them there. Our earned income tax is continuing to come in strong, which is taxes that every wage earner in the district pays the 0.75% to the district. Our interest last year, when we passed our budget, interest rates were still at historic lows. If we follow the news, we've seen what the Federal Reserve has done really mainly for the past 6 months, has significantly increased the interest rate. So we as a district, we see a benefit from that. At this point in the year, which we still have almost a whole nother quarter to benefit from, I'm projecting that our interest earnings will come in over $200,000 over budget. Over budget, yes. We have invested in some treasury bills, short term, 6-8 months, that have come due that have given us, as much as over 4% interest for a time period. So we have taken advantage of those higher interest rates, and from about $60,000 what we earned a year ago to almost probably $300,000 I'm hoping this year. That's pretty significant. And that's all because of what has happened to interest rates over the past couple months, not years. So our basic ed subsidy is coming in $472,000 over budget. Back when we passed our budget in June, there wasn't a state budget approved yet, which is typical. At the time, Governor Wolf had made some proposals for significant increases to basic ed, which we budgeted, which we typically do around 40-50% of what his projections, or any governor, I'm not just saying Governor Wolf's. So what we budgeted compared to what actually was approved, there was a difference of $472,000. So an excellent opportunity for the district. And then there was an additional state grant as well that was approved, a safety grant that was not in the original budget, our original budget, but was approved as part of the state budget later on in June. So the additional revenue there. A big portion of the additional revenue over budget. We all know that Eisenhower had a fire 2 years ago. We have started to see some of the insurance revenue come in from that, which we at this point in the year have received around $900,000. So
There seems to be some confusion about that running around the community. There seems to be some talk that we've actually come to a settlement, but that is not true. So you've taken in that amount so far.
We've taken in that amount there. That is not part of the settlement. That is kind of what a minimum the insurance company has agreed to, that the settlement is going to be a certain number minus a percentage that they withhold, and then they are required to pay us the difference. So that $908,000 that we've taken in is just a portion of the settlement. So that has not yet been settled. So again, I'm sorry, there has been no settlement with Eisenhower yet.
Yeah, there just seems to be some sort of a talk going around that was final, and but I was surprised because I thought, where did anybody get that? So good.
Yeah, and it seems kind of weird that the money first has to come into the general fund, because ultimately the general fund owns everything within the district. Now the board can later on vote to transfer that to capital reserve or capital projects to help with the rebuild of Eisenhower. But by law, it has to come into the general fund first, because ultimately the general fund paid for everything. So that's why you see it there. I have nothing really listed under anything revenues that came in under budget that was any significance. So there's about 5 big items that kind of caused revenues to come in at $2 million over.
The basic ed subsidy for this coming state fiscal year, preliminary numbers looking the same as these or better?
We will cover that.
Okay.
I have those numbers in the next couple slides here.
Yep.
So,
Good.
As far as expenses for 22-23, when we passed our budget back in June, we had budget expenditures of just over $61 million. I estimate that they are going to come in just over $60 million. So right now, a difference of just over $1 million less, which is a good thing. And here there's 5-6 reasons why. The larger reasons, again, the budget comes in and over all over the place depending on line items, but these are kind of the major reasons. Salaries are coming in $382,000 less. Medical insurance is coming in almost $500,000 less than what was budgeted for. Budgetary reserve is a line item that we typically put in the budget, just kind of a placeholder if something comes up unexpected during the year that isn't budgeted for, which we really didn't have any of that knock on wood, we don't have any of that at this point. We still have 3 months to go. So we don't have any expenditures attributed to the budgetary reserve. And I do apologize, that fourth line should say capital reserve transfer. It's coming in a little bit less. One of the reasons for that is in the budget that we passed last year, we had budgeted $1 million for to transfer to capital reserve for the purpose of Eisenhower. Now, with our budget at the time was a $3 million budget imbalance, and our hope was if we break even or to the positive, we would transfer some of that money, and we just wanted $1 million in the budget to transfer. At this point, looking to the future, based on the projections here, I would not recommend transferring any money unless we really do come.
Yeah, you're not going to recommend a transfer because we have there's a couple of things I wanted to say about the capital reserve and then these cyber charter tuitions. So I have a few questions about that. But on the capital reserve transfer, we like to discipline ourselves to do a capital reserve transfer every year. But we have some motions on the table and we've been briefed on some safety and security issues. Now, I think we're going to have to think real hard about how we're going to get this all to work out because these are, new developments. Our security and consultant, as you all know, has talked to us about a new program. So, and you're never quite sure how anything's going to work out. You hope that you can do the best you can without any perfect solutions. But in terms of paying for it, that's what this committee is all about. So you have some numbers on the agenda tonight that Terry's committee does. And one, we don't know too much about the first motion. I don't know how that's going to go. And the second motion, you put a number down.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So, do you feel that's an accurate number at this point?
Yeah, that's, the second motion is for additional security guards in our, across the district. 3 of them. Right now, we are paying a company for 2 guards. So we have what the hourly rate that we pay is, and it's
So it's
just,
the same company.
yes, it'd be the same company. So we have that, and we project that based on the number of school days we have, the number of hours they work. So, that's a pretty fair estimate.
So this would be for 1 year for these, for the guards go on a 1-year basis.
The way
Is
the
that
motion reads, if you would pass it today, the way it reads is that the estimate is based on a yearly basis, but we would continue that until the board voted not to do that anymore.
Yeah. So if we look at it as something over, a number of years, I mean, I don't know how long this epidemic will last probably for a long time until we get to figure out what we're going to do as a country about it. But that's a recurring cost, and it's a big one. Because that puts our total guards at what? If we were to pass this motion. So you've got,
We would have 5 across the district, 5 armed guards.
as a recurring expense.
Yes. And that would, the 5 total, the motion today is 165,000 for an additional 3.
So times 5.
We're talking about $275,000 a year.
Extra, yeah. Yeah, but you're gonna, next year you have to re-up, correct? On the 5.
We
So
would-
every year you're gonna pay out.
Yes, yeah, I mean, that's a recurring yearly cost. We wouldn't be coming back to the board for permission to hire the 3 or the 5.
Okay. Okay, so that's the procedure.
Yeah, once the
So,
board votes to hire the additional 3, that's something that continues from 1 year to the next.
so you said this is a budget for March. Have you put this new number in,
No.
assuming?
I would not include that, the new number. 'cause
Until,
that's a
but still, we're gonna have to think about, because, over a few years, you're getting into millions of dollars. And
I
it
mean-
does seem to me that I'd like to know something's gotta have to give here. You have a number of, you can raise some taxes over the years, which nobody really wants to do. I don't know if it's fair to the taxpayers necessarily, but you also have the cyber charter tuition, and you're over budget already by a big number. And what's caused that?
It would be the additional,
So it's more students.
yes.
Correct.
How many would that be approximately?
It depends on a handful. It depends on whether or not they're students with special needs or if they're regular enrolled students. But, since COVID pushed the cyber charter schools to up their game a little bit. They got better as a result of it. And now they offer a lot of the things that we were offering during COVID, like synchronous instruction. And so they've improved their game. So we've had more people seek them out.
The district was invited, district members were invited to a seminar last week at the junior high. And the discussion was about these payments. I think a lot of people in the public don't realize that local taxpayers are responsible for these bills. It's not about school choice. It's about who pays for it. And right now, it's the local taxpayers that are footing this bill every year. So I think we're going to have to discuss this a little bit more carefully about how we're going to target this number, because it's getting pretty high here.
What's the total line item amount for cyber school this year?
1.1 million.
1.1.
And then
Well, this year we're projected to spend $1.6 million on cyber school.
That's for this coming year, Jared?
For the current, the 22-23, which is for the upcoming year, I have projected that at $1,745,000.
It had been roughly $1 million historically for the last several years.
If you look at the budget projection,
It was always a little over.
we were right a little, we jumped over $1 million 2 years ago. And then have significantly seen
It's
some
really,
increases since then.
How many students is that?
I'd say on average, we on any given day are probably between 70 and 90, maybe. It's a very transient population.
But it's less than 100.
It's less than, we're at less than 100 right now.
Yeah, so
Yes, yeah.
1.6 million is about 12, 14 teachers that we could employ in this district that we can't employ in this district because we're sending the money to cyber school. That's 12 teachers. For 100 students.
It's a,
It's a grossly unfair number. And the money that comes from that 1.6 million is out of our property taxes. It's not state money, and it's not federal money. It's strictly out of our back pockets.
correct. The law is broken, sir. The law, the way they set it up years and years ago, 20 years ago, as part of the school choice idea, they basically made it based on what we pay for our average student. But we pay for lights and heat and, janitors and all these other things. So the expenses that we pay far exceed that what a cyber school pays. So, and then oftentimes these students go to cyber school, and then the cyber schools identify them as needing special education, which increases our costs even more. So there's some situations we're paying $30,000 plus a year for a student that's sitting at home with a Chromebook. And that's all that company has to pay for is the Chromebook and the teacher on the other end of the Chromebook to teach them. And it's costing us 2 or 3 times what we pay for.
And we don't know what they're paying that teacher.
And we don't know what they're paying the teacher, and oftentimes they pay much less than
Yeah, and we don't even know if they have an endowment attached to themselves. I mean, we know nothing about how they really operate, particularly PA Cyber. So I think we're going to have to figure out, moving forward, trying to find out the special needs students. I can kind of see that there may be, you could probably address really what the common thread is and why this is needed. But for other students who are not who are not special needs, why are they doing this? Is it the older students? Is it the younger students? Is it because they need to work? I mean, is it?
We find that they go for a couple of reasons. And I don't want to paint this with a very broad brush, so I don't want to do that, because there are some students who need it and do well in those situations. That seems to be a very small minority. Students that play travel sports, right? So my son's really good at hockey. They go to Minnesota and Wisconsin and Canada several times a year. They need the flexibility of a cyber school. Their student is very good. They do the work. Everything's good, right? That's a very small percentage. There's other students who are, or families who are drawn to it because they have this image that public schools are bad for whatever reason. But cyber charter schools are public schools. They operate under the same rules that we operate on. So if parents have a misconception that public schools are bad for the kids, cyber schools are public schools. They have to operate under the same rules, teach all the same things that we have to teach. And then a lot of times you'll find students who are fleeing for attendance reasons. So I don't like to go to school. I don't want to go to school. Mom fights with me, can't get me out of bed. We start sending the truancy officer after them. And then they say, well, you know what, we're not going to go to school anymore. So they go to a cyber school. That cyber school enrolls them, gladly takes our money. Guess what? The student doesn't want to go to that school either. So they run into some problems, and then that student will bounce to another school. That's why Jared said they're very transient. They bounce around, and a lot of our taxpayers are paying bills for students to not be educated all too often. It's tragic, and it needs fixed. So we need to, as a district, one of my jobs is going to be to really come up with a plan to both advocate to get the law changed and have a concerted effort to bring these students back into our schools, simultaneously.
But we sometimes pay twice though, because unlike the cyber school, if the student lives in our district and they knock on our door, we have to take them regardless of what happened in the past for them academically.
100%. Yes, sir.
So when they fail at the cyber school, then we get them, some of them eventually back. So now we paid for them to go out for that period of time. And now when they come back to our system, we have to pay extra to catch them back up to where they should have been.
Absolutely.
So we paid twice for that student.
And sadly, oftentimes they come back with an IEP, which means that the cyber school has identified them as special needs, and now we have to pay 2 teachers or 3 teachers and more staff so they're not only do we have to pay for them to catch them up, but we also, just by nature, it's a more expensive. Cost.
Production. Yes, I one of the things that impressed me about that group that came to speak with the community is she said the one woman said she's beginning to see some cracks. And we were like, where we've written, Mike Vukovich has written letters to the editor locally. We have signed petitions with the PSBA. There's been other letters. There have been petitions. There has been like this seminar that we had. And with, at least locally, we're not getting the message through. And I think we've got to emphasize that do we understand that we can't change this law, that only the state legislature can address this. And we know what happened last year when they said, well, you're not going to get your public money unless you leave the cyber schools alone. So it must have been a very fierce negotiation. But this is a problem for us. And now safety and security is an extraordinarily important measure, but it's going to cost real hard dollars on the table. Nobody's going to give it to us for free, whatever ideas we have. And we have to realize as a community with these assessment issues that you've also given us a handout about, that we can't afford everything. So we're going to have to make some hard choices. That was the point I wanted to make. But so you have your work cut out for you, because there's some stubborn people around this Commonwealth who simply do not want to address. I don't mind paying bills, but if I get a bill from a plumber or a banker or a credit card company and I don't understand the bill and what I'm really paying for, you call up and say, why am I paying this? You have to itemize it or do something. We get no itemization on their expenses. So it's a big hole, I think, in the law. And it should be, I think, that the state taxpayers figure out a formula and pay it and take it off the backs of the local districts. And so anyway.
Yes, ma'am. Not only is it, I wouldn't mind paying for quality, but
Yeah.
sadly, when they rank the Pennsylvania school districts, the bottom 100 are always the cyber charter schools every year.
And so over the last couple of years, it's gone from a little over $1 million to 1.6 million. So that's a $500,000 to $600,000 difference in the last couple of years.
And COVID certainly plays a role in that as well. A lot of students went to cyber during COVID.
A few years ago, it was only 70 or 80 kids. We're not seeing it, it's not 150 kids.
No, it's-
So the cost per child, they're taking these kids into IEPs, and we're paying $30,000 for the same student. Okay. Historically, we've been in the 70 range, and now we're in the 80 range, but yet our costs have gone up 50%.
Oh, it's been a huge escalation.
Yeah. There's a huge escalation because of the way they classify the students, which means that they get a bigger check from us. Okay. Student doesn't necessarily get any additional help.
So it's something that I think we're going to have to target going forward in this committee. And then at some point, Jared, I'd like you to be able to come back in and talk to us about. It's really wonderful to see that our expenditures on the medical insurance are under budget. I don't know how the heck that happened, but I wasn't expecting it.
Well, a lot of that is when we hired a good many teachers last year. When we hired really any new position, I always budget worst case scenario. So they're coming on to us with a family plan, which the difference between a family plan and a single plan can be upwards of $15,000, $16,000. So a big chunk of that, again, can be a difference on when people, change their plans, or how they are, or what plan they bring on when they're hired. So
Is any of that a result of our contract with the, not the teachers, but
with AFSCME,
with AFSCME, yeah.
That healthcare doesn't change until this year,
Okay,
and
that's
that
right, January 1st.
that will add, not save money, that will cost money.
Okay.
So
And then one other question on the guards. That's a multi-year contract we have with Bramler, or however you say that,
Bramlett.
Bramlett.
I believe it was. I would have to double check as to when it's coming due.
And there's a yearly escalation. In
Typically,
cost.
there's been, we pay so much per hour. From one year to the next, it has maybe gone up a quarter or 50 cents an hour.
So in order to make sure we don't run the general fund down too much. We have to, I think there's a way to work this out that we don't have to have a tax increase this year, but I'm not sure. I need to think about a little bit more what we might talk about, but certainly, and part of it is not reserving next year, which is a crying shame, but if it were to be that type of a choice, but what am I talking about here? Half a mil, or 0.5%, I should say, is about a little over $250,000 right now. What is it to do a tax?
If you were to raise taxes by 0.5%, you'd be looking at around $140,000 in additional tax revenue.
That doesn't cover much anything. So we have to think about it because we're getting close, because we're going to have to make a decision on what we're going to do about real estate taxes in another month, roughly, right?
Yeah.
Well, you pass your proposed budget May 22nd, and then by law, you have till June 30th to pass your budget, the final budget, which gets sent to PDE. So we typically either do that the first meeting in June, which I think is June 13th, or we would do it the second meeting in June, which is June 27th.
Okay. Yeah. We're scheduled to meet on June 27th, correct?
We would
This
meet on-
committee or just the board?
This committee would be
Yeah, I
If-
think so.
if needed.
Okay, any questions on this part of your report? Anybody? Okay, we'll move on.
So 22-23, the current year is set to, in my opinion, pretty much break even. Maybe see a small $140,000 reduction in our general fund balance, which in $60 million, close to $60 million, is pretty much breaking even, in my opinion. Going into the budget that we are working on now, and we'll have to pass by June 30th, 23-24 school year budget. We'll kind of breaking it down, going into a little bit more detail. I am projecting, and again, these numbers correlate directly to, I'm not going to go into too much detail. We're looking at some time here. But for 23-24, local revenue of $34.5 million. Again, touching, we're looking at possibly a small increase in real estate tax revenue. If there is no tax increase, I would be keeping taxes the same, and we'd be seeing that small decrease mainly due to what I expect will be a slight decrease in our assessed value due to tax appeals, just properties coming off without seeing any property tax assessments going on our rules. So interest revenue, again, at $300,000. We kind of talked about it, how significantly it increased for the current school year. We're hoping that it's projected there as well. And then we just kind of, for the boards, the pre-K grant that we get through the IU is expected to see a $40,000 increase going into next year.
How many students were you projecting?
We would probably say with our 40 students, we have a pre-K classroom here at East Pike and a pre-K classroom at Ben Franklin as well. The next two slides the board has seen, and I think we shared them at the last Audit and Finance Committee meeting, but it kind of touches base with the local revenue, is our assessed value history over the past couple years. I went back to 2017-18 school year. And as you can see, it pretty much shows, there's a little blip, 1920, 21, but there's a pretty steady decline in our assessed value, which drives out the dollars we see in real estate taxes. The next page is the actual revenue that we receive on real estate, and it kind of follows the same curve. But you can see 17-18, we received just over $28 million in property tax revenue. And that was the year that we went up to 15.36. That's the last year we had a tax increase.
Mills.
Yeah, 15.36 mils. So these numbers are relevant, as you can see, going down to 23-24. If there is no tax increase, just because of decreases in assessed value, the district is going to take in projected to take in just under $27 million. So that's over $1 million loss in real estate tax revenue because of our decreased assessed value.
So that's $200,000 a year average.
Yes, sir.
And what would you put, all right, right now, go over with us what you have in that safety and security budget, please. What you have in, under that, those items, and what am I doing here? What did you have as of March?
There's nothing in that projection for those items because they have
Yeah,
not
I
been
know,
voted on yet.
To date? We haven't voted on them yet, so what is it right now? I just want the public to know on the YouTube channel what we've got, what we're investing right now is general safety and security measures. So we already have 2 guards.
Two
We
guards,
have-
which would be around $110,000.
Okay, we have the improvements, like we did the East, do you count that in the East Pike office and the,
That was a safety. I mean, that was a safety, so that was 1.8. I mean, that's not in that projection there. All that money came out of capital reserve. So,
There's also the contract with the borough.
yeah, so that's,
the borough's $110,000 a year for their increase. We also have a safety consultant,
Yeah.
which is about $25,000 a year.
We're doing the technology upgrades.
The camera upgrades. I mean, a lot of that stuff. I mean, the capital reserve is really typically where any building improvements come from. Anything that's going to need to be maintained from one year to the next comes out of the general fund, which is what we're talking
well,
about.
either has to be borrowed or you have to take it out of the taxpayers' funding, or you've got to get it somewhere. You can make a transfer into cap. So,
We're still working on quotes for those other items that recommended by the security consultant, but the rough estimate for those would be, somewhere in the neighborhood of $700,000 that we would add on over the next couple years if we, as we roll them out one by one. I want to go into
we
specifics.
can't, yeah, I don't want you to go
Yeah.
into specifics, but it just seems to me that the public needs to start understanding what this is actually costing altogether. And there's no argument that it's not necessary. What is true is is we know, just anybody should know that you don't know what will and won't work, or if anything will happen. So it's kind of a mixed bag here. So somebody has a question.
I think he just joined.
Somebody just joined.
Okay, very good. Okay. So we sunk some money into it already, and we're going to continue to. So we're going to have to get pretty good at that. Moving forward. Okay, thank you. Go on.
State revenue for next year is projecting at a little over $22 million. We have 2 big increases in the budget right now, $400,000 for basic ed and $50,000 for special ed. Governor Corbett, it is his first year. It is his first budget proposal.
Corbett.
Not Corbett.
I'm sorry. I apologize for that.
We talked about him last week.
Yes, thank you, sir. I
That's
knew we
why
had
I
talked
popped in your head.
Shapiro. So part of his budget proposal back in February was significant increases to school funding. His proposal for Indiana includes almost a $900,000 increase in basic ed and $152,000 for special ed. And those are really our 2 biggest line items that any governor controls every year. But our budget, as we typically do, includes about 40% of those increases to be conservative. So hopefully we will know something closer to when we have to pass our budget by June 30th.
That's what I'm hoping. Yep.
But we will, for now, we're carrying that 40% of what he's proposing. So
Sure would help, wouldn't it?
Just maybe
Even to
just a
get-
note on that funding seminar that you were all invited to is a result, it was sparked by, in February, the court case where the judge declared that the state funding formula was inequitable and unconstitutional, which basically means that the state legislature has failed in their mandate to provide schools enough money to operate safely and efficiently and thoroughly. So, so that's another thing that we're going to have to keep an eye on and advocate for, is the legislature now is tasked basically by this court decision to step up their game and figure out how they're going to fund education at the level that is required. So, that's something to keep an eye on as well.
federal revenues, we are budgeting at $1.8 million. The majority of the title allocations are access reimbursement pretty much staying the same from one year to the next. But I did want to point out our ESSER funding, which has been a significant amount of money, over $5 million we've received since the beginning of COVID from the federal government. We are projecting a decrease next year of $1.1 million. And that is because ESSER funding has a set deadline we have to use it by, and we are coming up on that of September 30th of 2024. So we have been working, and I believe it was smartly to kind of spread that out over the time period and not just hit a fiscal cliff where that falls off. So we have been decreasing how we've been using those funds and what we've been using that on, but we're still going to see somewhat of a cliff, and we are starting to hit that because the ESSER funding is drying up. We have the deadline to use it. So we are, from last year to this year, decreasing that funding source by a little over $1 million. That's pretty significant.
Sure is. Well, the committee will be busy,
Yes.
and you'll be busy.
So the next slide just sums up all of the different funding sources. As you can see, this percentage may vary between districts, but for Indiana, historically, the majority of our funding comes from local funding, with the majority of that coming from real estate taxes here in the district. That other on that slide, the $1 million, is just a projection, a placeholder, with the hopes that the district over the next school year can settle the insurance claim with Eisenhower. I just wanted to include something in the budget. There is an equal expenditure to offset that money going as a transfer to capital reserve. So that million, I don't want to mislead the board or the public that $1 million is, something that can help cover current expenditures. It is budgeted to move right back out of the general fund as soon as we receive it. So,
And the word needs to go out. Nothing is settled yet on this number. Nothing.
No.
So anybody who's suggesting otherwise is mistaken.
no,
That number is just a placeholder for a number.
yes,
Okay, I just want to make that clear. Okay, that's not a real number.
no, it is just a placeholder.
I think you actually, if this goes, can you somehow modify this and say on that line that this is simply a placeholder estimate? Because somebody's going to look at this and say, oh,
Not even an estimate. It's so far from the,
It's worst case scenario, isn't it, Chair?
Well,
I think so.
you have to remember that part of the revenue, there's revenue booked, actual revenue received in 22-23 of $900,000. So based on those two numbers, and again, they are just projections, they are just placeholders. But you combine those two, and basically we're saying $1.9 million could be an estimate of where we may. So it's it's not significantly low because you have to combine both years.
Nevertheless, if you could amend that just as
I
you
can
see fit, so
put something on
so
there.
put it, because that's the kind of confusion we don't need.
But I did want to include it on there because it'll be a revenue and an expense for next year if we do settle. So.
Okay.
As far as expenditures for next year, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but we are budgeting expenditures at almost $64 million. And again, they're the detail broken down by all the different areas as part of the projection that you also have in front of you. The biggest portion of our budget, as it always is salary and benefits. We're still holding a budgetary reserve of $250,000 for any unexpected expenditures next year. And then transfers, that number includes both our debt payments that we have to make every year, but also $1 million for basically to transfer that budgeted revenue from the insurance claim. So again, those two offset each other.
Okay. Questions about this page?
I'm looking back at 18-19. We were at, I'll say 58 million, right? So in 5 years, we've gone up $10 million in our budget. Or no, 6.
6 to the current year, 22-23, but close to $9 million into 23, 24.
That seems like a steep
Is that ESSER?
climb.
Is that some of your ESSER figure?
Esther's may play a little bit of that. There's, health insurance, there is PSERS rate, there are salaries, alone with that, but also, a couple $100,000 for cyber schools, outside placements,
Yeah.
all of those type of things.
Yeah, and
We've taken on additional
that's
debt.
almost 2 million a year.
Then real quick.
That just seems high. Because I started thinking when I got on the board, I thought it was like 54 million something, and I looked, I'm like, wow.
Taking on a couple
That's
extra
all.
$100,000 for the additional bonds we just took out in July, so that
Yeah,
that plays a part of it as well.
wow.
Mhm.
And we haven't seen probably all the inflation hit yet either. Yeah, sort of back.
Seems to be dissipating a little bit. I mean, the numbers are starting to look good, but it'll take a while, so. Okay, anything else? Shall we go to any additional budget information?
Just for I wanted to remind the board that this budget projection here doesn't include a tax increase, which is typically how we do budget. There are additional staffing positions that were previously approved by the board in here with an additional learning support teacher, and a math teacher and an ELA teacher at the junior high. They are included in this budget projection here. And then the increases to basic ed and special ed funding are projected at 40% of the governor's increase.
I'm betting he'll do better than that.
We can hope. But overall, for 23, 24, the difference between revenues and expenditures in this budget is $4.5 million. So this budget currently has a $4.5 million deficit in it, which is pretty close to what we were projecting back in June of last year. When we always do part of this budget projection you see here is we project out 4 years in advance, because we can't just look from 1 year to the next. But it's important to look ahead. When we passed our budget last year at this time, this projection had the deficit at a little over $4 million. So it's pretty close to what we were looking at a year ago.
We've been fortunate. You've been able to close a lot of that over the years.
Typically, we as a district, have been comfortable around $2 million. This 4.5 is very significant.
What's the total proposal for the BEF, SEF? What's the governor's quote?
With $900,000,
900, and so you're saying 400,000.
we've said 400,000.
So there's 500,000 on the table that may show up.
You're
Yes,
right.
sir.
I think there's a better chance than not. The politics are different this year. Everything's been sort of, so we'll see, but who knows? Okay, so you're done with that exhibit, and
Yep.
next you're gonna go to these other pages, correct?
Yeah, then the next thing on our agenda from the budget presentation, and it's just real quick to remind the board that on May 22nd, we are canceling the May 8th board meeting because of the excellence.
Excellence educational.
Yes, is that evening at the KCAC. So our one board meeting in May is scheduled for May 22nd, at which point the board will have to approve a proposed budget. We do that so a budget can be advertised to the public, so that you can legally vote on something on your final budget in June. Now the budget can change from what you approve as a proposed budget and what you finally adopt, but we have to approve something to advertise to the public. That will happen May 22nd.
Okay.
And then the other attachment there under the budget update is just something that I put together that shows if the board is considering a tax increase, what different percentages of our Act 1 index, which is 5.2%, which is set by the state. That is the most we can raise taxes by. But I broke it down, showed you what the current estimate or the estimate of tax collections would be, what the increase would be, and then what the average homeowner within our district, what that tax increase would mean to them on their tax bill.
So, yeah, I see the 0.5% doesn't take you too far if you divide that. Okay. Well, now you see it. I mean, you gotta, you know, to cover new additional expenses in certain categories, you're looking at. Well, 2% gets you a little over 500,000. Think about it. We've got to start running it through your mind based on these numbers, what we might do. And of course, a lot's going to depend on June, what happens. So,
Yeah, I don't know that we'll have a decision from the governor or a budget passed in June before the board needs to make a decision.
okay.
The athletic funding thing you had on that last sheet,
Where are you, Terry?
on the last page of his presentation,
Yeah, the upcoming purchase.
board consideration.
That's something we'll have to talk about is how,
Oh, I can see it. Okay.
conversation we've been having the past couple of years is the funding for lacrosse and that the board last year voted just for a one-time increase to continue. You'll have to make a decision on what you want to do with that as well.
A one-time increase or a one-time contribution?
It was a one-time the way.
Yeah, a one-time
Contribution,
contribution.
So
And how
if you
much,
want to continue that or how you
how
want
much
to,
was that?
I think it doubled from, I believe lacrosse was getting 5,000 or 10,000 and it went to 10 or 20. I believe I'd have to look
Yeah.
back, but that'll be something we will need to discuss before you approve your budget.
And that's not in there yet.
What is currently in there is what was approved last time,
Last year.
so it was just kind of as a placeholder in there.
I think our discussion went deeper than that of how we're going to share costs, what we're going to do about this. As I remember, we had a comment, I don't know if it was at this committee or some other committee, but we were talking about, you know, how we're understanding what boosters are paying for. And I mean, I think we were all pleasantly surprised, but nevertheless surprised at how much money was raised privately for the outdoor classroom, which gives us some basis of understanding what the district can afford, at least certain segments of it, and how we might develop that so that we don't have these escalating costs in this budget either. So Rob, that's another thing you can put.
No, that's no problem.
And Julia, I was gonna ask if, like, your next meeting, maybe we ask the administration to give us a list of potential things that we could consider to cut or reduce.
Or at least stay even.
Right.
I mean, I don't know what too many cuts at this point, but I do think that the game in the future is to keep stuff from escalating on us too fast, because costs are escalating, not just because of inflation, because arguably there's more need. So, you know,
And the one topic that made me think of that or remind me of is athletic funding. Are there any programs that should be looked at and, you know, at least discussed?
we can certainly arrange for that for the agenda. The one thing about the one thing that I really think was a great expenditure was the police agreement with the Indiana Borough, because that gives us after school some protection, actually 24/7 really. Well, however you want to put that, football games, athletic events, which the guards don't necessarily give us. So, you know, we have to decide also, do we want to see the extra security guards or this particular other program we've discussed? Do we want to see them as pilot programs or do we want to see them as permanent? You talked about them unless the board votes otherwise, but I think we need to get a handle on where we are because things have to be effective.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The police presence has been tremendous since we've added. I mean, they really have not only met the expectation, but I would say exceeded our expectations for that partnership so far. You know, the layers of security are something that, you know, would be welcome, but, you know, it's a board decision. You know, it's definitely something that we have to consider and weigh the cost effectiveness of that. As for the teachers, we need the learning support teacher is necessary. Without it, we're going to be out of compliance, and that's not somewhere we want to be. The English and the math teacher, we can discuss. I mean, we've spent the junior high principal, if he's listening, is probably squirming, but because they spent a lot of time working on that plan and that schedule, and we have some grant money to pay for a lot of the things that go with that. But the teachers are an additional cost. So that's something you're gonna have to weigh out too. And we can survive without it, but it's gonna mean a significant amendment to the plan that we've been working on over the last couple months.
You're not as good in education. So.
But I think to Terry's point though, Rob, is there anything else we can do differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to sit down.
And that really needs to come from the administration rather than have the board try to dictate to that. We really need to hear what your recommendations are and how you guys may approach this in order to try to reduce that $2.5 million.
So
4.5.
Yeah, well, no, 2.5. If we get down to 2,
I agree.
that's the sweet spot. Okay, and I want everybody to understand that the 2 million is significant because doing the good budgeting work that he has done in the past, he always underestimates the revenue a little bit and always overestimates the expenses, and that usually winds up in that $2 million range. And if you look at this in the past, you'll see that the fund balances actually, a lot of them are broke even, or we actually were able to save some money over the last 4 or 5 years. It was in part because of the budgeting that we had done. The problem is that the 4 million is beyond anything we've looked at since 2018.
Yes, sir. I don't want to speak for Jared, but I think our recommendation would be have to do both. We have to look at tightening our belt and finding where we can save money, and we have to consider raising taxes. We're to that point. I know it's not popular, but if we are going to add, things to help children, this is what we're all about. The security upgrades are really just to protect the students. The ELA teacher and the math teacher are to help students recover from that COVID dip. And if there's a way we can absorb those costs down the road with retirements and whatnot, obviously we would look for those. But I think we're going to have to look at all of the above. Would be our recommendation. I don't want to speak for you, Chair.
No,
And that's all
absolutely
I'm
agree.
asking for. If you guys come with some topics to discuss, and then we almost have like a workshop type.
Okay,
We
can
can
do that.
working on that, sir. Absolutely.
so we'll need an hour or more.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a few more minutes left. I
Yeah, we
want to
don't
know
need
if a few of our guests have any questions, but you.
We don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this because this is one topic that
Didn't we just buy band uniforms? I thought we just bought, what
it has
uniforms?
probably
Football, we
Was it
just bought football.
football. The band uniforms are kind of a placeholder on here
Okay.
because they were purchased probably 8 years ago or more. But this is the capital reserve budget. We will talk about this in buildings and grounds in May. But it's also kind of one of those items that falls between both committees. So I wanted to present it, at least get the conversation started. The first page you have is kind of an estimate of where I feel the capital reserve will end 22-23. So come June 30th, what will that balance look like? And I'm projecting a balance of just over $2 million. That includes a transfer of $200,000 from the general fund. And that is because 2 years ago, when the board voted to redo the turf at the high school, it was paid for out of capital reserve with the expectation and a board vote that the capital reserve would be paid back over 2 years. The first transfer happened last year in 21-22. The second transfer will happen this year in 22-23. So that's where that $200,000 at the top of the page comes from. Capital reserve has also seen a significant increase in interest earnings. We've been able to do some more creative things with their interest, not just have it sitting in the savings account at S&T. We've transferred some to other investment options that the board approves, which has helped as well earn some additional money. But this is kind of the rolling list of items that the board reviews periodically throughout the year of just things here at the district that need looked at.
And the East Pike HVAC, that'll move over to the planned project column in the next fiscal year? Or
Yes.
why is that, you're just not gonna pay for that till out of the
It
new budget?
is, it was not approved as the beginning of this year we approved the budget. So yes, next year you will see money coming out of that. And then it probably could be moved over to this year because the board voted in November to.
And then the junior high pool, we're gonna have updated needs there
Yes, I
at the
did.
next meeting, at the
I
next
did.
building grounds meeting.
Yeah, if you look, and we're gonna have those conversations, the proposed budget for 23-24 has a significant increase in that area from 150 to 400 because there are other significant needs that are coming from the pool.
Okay.
I think you need to put the junior high roof on a 3. It's beyond its service life.
Say that again, Tom.
The junior high roof is beyond its service life.
It's leaking
Was it leaking?
in the auditorium.
Cheney would check that out. I don't think that leak is current. I think that was an old leak that was fixed. I talked to Cheney about getting a estimate for repairing the damage that was there. So he's confirming that to make sure that we're there, but he said that to repair the paint and stuff from that old damage is a significant cost because of the location.
Plaster work.
I'm only bringing it up because of the age of the roof. It needs to get on the list because it's going to be expensive.
Yeah, it's our oldest roof in the district
Yeah,
at
we
this
don't
point.
want, we don't want it to be there when it's 35 years old.
Was it? Was it not replaced when the junior high was renovated?
Yes, how long ago?
20 years, not quite 20. It was 2005. Because
18.
that's when I first ran,
That's
so
why
it's,
I'm saying it's a 3.
and should it not be good for 20 years?
We'll put it at 2.
Well, that's why he's asking to put his priority 3, getting it on the
Get
list.
it on the
Oh,
Yeah, we're not looking at doing it next year, just have it
Okay.
on our list
Yeah,
for
yeah.
upcoming.
It's almost 20 years. By the time it hits 25, we're going to be having buckets and damage like the auditorium roof. We're going to start seeing that kind of damage throughout all this.
Okay.
Thanks.
That's why we put it as a 3.
I'm not advocating that we're gonna wait to see damage. I'm not advocating that we're gonna wait to see damage.
So that's-
No, but deferred maintenance, this is what happens. You get caught up with other projects and the deferred, what's the first to go? The 2s and 3s, maybe the 1s. So it's always a problem. Would any of our guests like to make a comment? Let's see, we have, go ahead, Mr. Lehman.
So, so I'm, my former teacher and also a former child or parent of a child that went to cyber school. And I have 2 different kids. I have a kid that is, has an IEP. I have a kid that has their IEP. And one of the things I will say is for Joseph, my oldest, self-motivated kid, he, did the research. He didn't stay very long because he liked the regular school better. But my other son who had the IEP needed to do a lot of research and he actually didn't, know a lot about how to do that because he had started in 6th grade and they really hadn't gotten into a lot of stuff. And I could see how he was, behind in a lot of ways. So then he went back to the regular classroom and he was behind in the regular classroom because there's stuff that I was a teacher, I was trying to help him. But then sometimes at home, you're like, okay, well, are you doing it for them or are you helping them? If you're doing it for them, they're getting good grades, but when they come back, they haven't learned that. And I was trying to back off, but it's really hard, when you're doing it, okay, this and this. So that's one of the things about the cyber school. Now, after being a teacher and having and I like the fact that you guys have teachers' desks and chairs because I had to bring my own desk when I was in Baltimore City. I didn't have one there, so that was kind of interesting and a lot of other stuff, but we don't go there. And then the other thing is, you have behavioral problems when you're a teacher, and the cyber school you don't. Technically, if you think about it, and I'm not saying cyber schools do this, but if you think about it, if you have math, you could actually do that lecture one time and just have it recorded and do it again because math doesn't change. Well, everyone Common Core did, but math doesn't change. So the thing that I'm not saying, this is at all about school choice or anything like that. It's the fact that you have the ability to have a teacher that doesn't have the behavior problems. They don't have to have the behavior problems because they're not in the classroom. They are, they can do this. They have the study hours afterwards, but if the kid doesn't go to the study hours, how are they getting the extra help? So there's a lot of stuff that it seems like it's great, but as a parent, I wish that I didn't send my child to cyber school because I think it was a mistake for me. Some kids excel And I agree that, look, that small percentage excel, but the majority of kids, it's not the best thing in the world. And the fact that they have CEOs and not a superintendent amazes me, but that's another story. But I just want to tell you my experience with cyber school. So if you do are looking at it or whatever, it's like, it's, you know, for some people it's great, others it's not. So I just wanted to make a comment about
Thank you.
that from both
Thank
points of view.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Aaron, but we gotta make it real clear. We're stuck between the rock and the hard
Oh, yeah.
place with the state being the one that's actually controlling this. And until they change the rules, then we just have to hang on for the ride.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, you know, if you have, you know, the parents thinking about cyber school, that's something that you can bring up, is the fact that, look, you know, you're not gonna have these resources, you're not gonna have the people helping your child as much as you are here. And that's something, like I said, looking back on it, I wish I wouldn't have done it because I wanted, and when Phoenix came back to school, he did so much better. But of course, then the school had to catch him up, and that's their issue. So I was just saying, my experience as a parent, you know, that's something you can tell people, look, it's not, it seems like it's the best thing, but it may not be. And that's what I wanted to bring up. But I appreciate the fact that the state, yeah, they have to figure it out. But all I know is as a parent, it wasn't a great experience for me.
Thank you, appreciate it. Yeah. Okay, anybody else for the good of the order? Anybody? I see we have our magistrate here. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Okay, anything else for the good of the
Can I say
order?
something real quick?
Yes, please.
I just want to get into the topic of school security. I've been with Pennsylvania State Police for 19 years. Sergeant in Pennsylvania State Police. I've been through active shooter training. I put on active shooter training. I don't think that we can rely on a grant from the Indiana Borough Police Department to be the end all be all when it comes to the security of the students. An active shooter is going to come from the outside in an elementary school. No one's bringing a gun in here. None of the students of the, you know, first through third grade are bringing a gun in here and beginning an active shooter type situation. But somebody's going to come in from the outside, and that's where we have to worry about the children in this district. Having a sign on the door, having the borough police there on drop off and pickup isn't going to do anything in the event of somebody coming in here in the middle of the day, conducting an active shooting type situation. You need somebody in the building to be here armed in the event that somebody comes in here in an active shooter type situation. Locking doors, having those preventative measures, having somebody monitor the building is a good step. Like I said, the borough police being here prior to and after school is also a good step. But it's that middle of the day type situation where you need somebody here that's armed that can give these students a chance in the event an active shooter comes into this building or any of the other buildings. Average response time is going to be anywhere from, you know, depending on who makes the call, depending on where the person's seen. If it's outside, if it's inside, it's going to be 3 to 7 minutes. It's going to be 3 to 7 minutes with everybody coming. So, you know, that call goes out to everybody in the county. That call goes out to the borough police. There's an active shooter. No matter who, you know, any police force that's on duty in the county is coming for an active shooters type situation, no matter where the jurisdiction is. But that response time is going to be your key piece of where it's going to hurt the students and be a safety issue. If somebody's in the building, you give these kids a chance to have a chance against an active shooter that gets into this building. No amount of blocks, no amount of people, you know, monitoring the outside with cameras are going to stop somebody from getting in here if they want to get in here with a gun. I'm telling you that right now. There's always an open door. There's always a window that can be broken. There's always security protocols that are violated. It's imperative that these guards are put into these schools. I have no skin in the game. I have about 7-8 years till retirement. I'm not looking for a retirement job. I'm not vouching for my friends. I'm not, you know, I know a lot of PSP guys are hired once they retire. But, you know, that's up to the company that hires them. But I do think it's imperative that these schools are filled with, or do have an armed guard on duty. And I ask that you guys, you know, make the right choice tonight. It's imperative.
So you think response time is where it's at?
Response time is where it's at. Like I said, depending on where the call's made, who makes the call, it gets transferred over to 911. 911 has to then contact the state police. Whatever you think of that system is something for another day. But, once the call's made to 911, county 911 then transfers it to the state police. It then goes out to all departments. It goes out to the borough. It goes out to the state police. That can take anywhere from how long the call takes to take, 1 to 2 minutes. Getting somebody on the phone for a minute at bare minimum, giving the information to the dispatcher. The dispatcher then has to turn around, notify the state police, notify the borough police, basically an all hands on deck type situation, respond to East Pike, respond to Ben Franklin, whatever it may be, and everybody's coming. Depending on the proximity of people, the state police barracks is what, 3 minutes from Ben Franklin from here, maybe, as fast as you can get here, maybe 7 minutes without, putting somebody in danger. They may be on patrol, they may not. They may be in the area, they may not. It's all about timing. But bare minimum, it's going to take 3 to 7 minutes for somebody to get here. And you don't want that to happen when somebody comes into school with a gun.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, two real quick.
Yeah.
So when the call goes out, because of the security arrangement we have, it's my understanding that while the state
We
police will
don't
be,
want, we don't want to get into this
Okay.
in the public forum, guys. So,
okay,
I think that one thing I
Well, then-
go ahead.
I had a second question. So our armed security guys are carrying a handgun. And the miscreant could bring in an AK or an AR.
Right.
So the question is the armed security guard with the handgun outgunned at this point in time?
Let me answer it this way. Would you rather have somebody here with a gun that's on the right team, or would you rather have no one here and a bunch of kids hiding in a closet? That's all I can say for that. Is he outgunned? Probably. If they come in with has there been times where they come in with a handgun as a time? They haven't used a rifle to conduct a school shooting? Absolutely. But I'd rather have somebody here with anything than to give my kid a chance than to have nobody here, to counter that threat. Like I said, the police aren't going to be here to counter that threat. Kids are going to die. I'm telling you, if somebody gets in here with a gun.
If I could just speak to that, when the police respond, you can kill someone with a handgun. You can shoot a shooter with a handgun a lot better than with nothing. There are schools in the county that have AK-47s in their buildings for these situations. And I'm certainly not asking that of Indiana at this point, but,
Yeah, and you have trained people that do this. It's not somebody with just give the guy a gun and go let him run the halls. It's either retired police officers, it's somebody that's been trained. I can tell you that I would 100% have no problem having somebody here like that rather than giving no chance to help the kids. Even the idea that somebody's in the building, an armed security guard may prevent somebody from thinking about doing that.
I think that's a big value.
These are the easiest, softest targets you can have, these schools. No locked doors are going to prevent this, I'm telling you. There's always something that goes wrong in security protocols. There's always an open door. There's always an easily accessible window. There's always somebody that's let in.
What do we do? What do we do with the kids on the plane? What do we do with the kids on the buses? How do we protect the kids in the southern part of Armstrong Township? So tell me how the guy that's here for 8 hours a day is going to help us with that. So these kids are vulnerable from the time they leave their house to the time they get home. And we can spend the money on these security guards and have somebody here.
Mm-hmm.
But our vulnerabilities are unlimited. And we haven't seen that yet.
Right, absolutely. But here's the thing. Here's my answer to that. There's vulnerabilities everywhere. There's vulnerabilities if you go to Walmart, you can be engaged by somebody with a gun. There's vulnerabilities if you go to the gas station, somebody can shoot you in the back of the head. There's vulnerabilities everywhere, but the secure facility that these kids are in almost 8 hours a day is the main point of access where somebody's going to come in here with some sort of weapon or some ill intention And there's gonna be nobody here for 3 to 7 minutes to counter that threat. Nobody. Who's gonna counter that threat if they come in this building? Is it gonna be a teacher? Is it gonna be a secretary? You give some chance to some kids, if you hire somebody that's in this building that is armed. That's the only chance these kids have. It's not the state police, it's not the borough police being there at pick up and drop off. It's a person here during school hours, outside during the, when people are getting dropped off and picked up, as well as the borough police. There's nothing wrong with the borough police being here. That's great. I like the fact that they're here to drop off and pick up. But during the day, if somebody comes in here, when most school shootings happen, they come in the middle of the day, they come in the morning, when the school's going on, they enter the buildings, they get in there somehow. The only chance these kids have, 1st to 3rd grade, is a person in here that is armed and knows what they're doing and can potentially counter this threat.
Can I ask, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. Do you know can you tell us which other schools have the automatic rifles in the
Please
building?
don't. Please don't. If you know, tell them.
Yeah, listen, I think you're focusing too much on the type of weapon too. I think you're focusing too much on the long gun and that type of thing. If that is something that security company implements in the future, or they implement and it has to be taken up by you guys, that's fine. But it doesn't matter what type of weapon they have. If the person comes in here with a weapon, I would rather have a person that's trained to protect my child in this building with a weapon, some sort of weapon, than I would have giving them no chance for this person to roam the halls and encounter basically locked doors and no one. I mean, who's gonna run towards that person in this building? Who's gonna run towards that person? And everybody's coming from the outside. There's nobody coming from this building that's gonna run towards that person with a gun. And I just wish that could be seen by you guys prior to your vote.
Well, thank you. I
Yeah.
think, I'm glad you came. It's been helpful. We can
Yeah.
we can certainly ask him after this. It's a quarter. We have another meeting to get to. And could you tell us your name?
Yeah, my name's Adam Thomas. My daughter's in 1st grade. She goes here. Her name's Isla. I've been pretty much everywhere, all over Pennsylvania throughout my career. I started in Troop H Carlisle. I worked patrol for 3 years out there. I came back towards the Indiana way. I was in Indiana patrol for about 5 years. I worked up here in patrol. I lived in Marysville at the time, so I'm from Pittsburgh, so I was living up here. But I met Katie, my wife. We moved back up here in 2015. We had our daughter. She's now 7. Did some different things. I worked in crime for 5 years up in Indiana. I got promoted to sergeant. I went to Harrisburg for 6 months. And now I work out of a bureau. Basically, I work with computers now. But I'm still the state police. So I've been through multiple active shooter scenario trainings. We held them, when this started becoming an issue, 5, 6 years ago. We held live drills. I've been through multiple active shooter type situations with live rounds, simunition rounds. I've been through multiple trainings, classroom trainings, as far as active shooter goes. I know how these situations play out. And like I said, the only way you're going to give these kids a chance is if you have somebody in the building. Don't worry about the weapons. Don't worry about what they have. It's one person in this building that can be running towards that threat when everybody else is hiding or running away. So that's how I can sum it up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anything else? Okay, I think we are adjourned.